what I want to do now is introduce Craig Mcnamara, who's moderating this panel and the afternoon panel, and it's a great privilege to do so. Craig and his wife Craig's the one in the middle. Ish. I guess. Me for lunch. Yeah. He's got his own lunch table. So he and his wife own and operate an organic walnut orchard called Sierra Orchards near Winters, and they've done so for about 30 years, more than 30 years, I believe. Craig recently hosted a farm field day for the organization that I run, California Climate and Agriculture Network. And partway through the tour, one of the participants, she sort of leaned over to me and she sort of whispered and she said, "He's not your ordinary farmer, is he?" And he's not. Those of you who know Craig knows that he not only produces walnuts, but he also, for example, leases out a portion of his farm to a young farmer who's doing a CSA farm. He devotes significant portions of the land for restoration, watershed health, conservation practices. He's the president of the California State Board of Food and Agriculture. His pride and joy is the Center for Land-Based Learning, which is a nonprofit organization that he founded that helps high school students build up greater social and human capital in their communities. And today he's playing the role of Oprah Winfrey, moderating our panels and engaging panelists in what we hope will be a dynamic and sort of engaging thought experiment. So please help me in welcoming Craig.
Good morning. Good morning. I can't tell you how excited and honored we are, your first panelists, to be here with you today. You really represent an amazing cross-section of farmers and NGOs, scholars, researchers, people who care deeply about what you were speaking about this morning, this remarkable world of food, the problems, the security issues. But you are the stakeholders. And so I was especially moved by Claire and Alistair's observation that if we are to grow a new food system, really from the grassroots up, we need creativity, participation, diversity of knowledge, and experience. And I think you, the stakeholders and the thought leaders and the doers in this room, really are the people who need to do this. I know that any 6 of you could be right up here as Oprahs and panelists doing this tremendous job, but it's our job to create a conversation that engages you, and then during the rest of the day, during the breakouts, we're really going to tease this apart and do the heavy lifting. So let me introduce this amazing group of people who I've had a chance to meet last night. I suggested, why don't we get together for dinner, because people were coming in from near and far, so we had a little moment to get together. From community gardens to food justice, this New York native is a strong community activist striving to make New York City a better place to live. Karen Washington has worked with local neighborhoods. Karen, you've worked with local neighborhoods to turn empty lots into community gardens. She has spoken out for garden protection and preservation and helped launch a city farmers market, bringing garden fresh vegetables to her neighbors. Community service is simply in her DNA. So we're so excited to have you here from the Bronx. And on this side of me is Ben Burkett. He has 25 years of experience on the farm and organizing grassroots organizations to champion the rights of small farmers. After personally experiencing devastation in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, Ben worked with other local farmers to develop a plan to rebuild while minimizing the disruption. He has vast experience in small-scale farming, traveling around the world, exchanging knowledge and information with farmers, especially throughout parts of Africa. So please welcome Ben. As Senior Scientist and Director of Sustainable Food Systems Program at Pesticide Action Network, Marcia Ishii-Eitman works to find alternatives to pesticides worldwide. She brings a rich international perspective to the discussion, having worked in Asia and Africa for more than 14 years developing farmer field schools. Please welcome Marcia. Patricia Crawford has been a leading researcher researching childhood obesity for many decades. As a matter of fact, she is the only cooperative extension specialist in the nation whose work is solely directed at preventing childhood obesity. Pat's focus is community-based, attempting to introduce fresh fruits and vegetables to food banks and communities across the nation. She has been front and center in changing food policy where it is needed most. Please welcome Pat. And Raj Patel has been referred to as the rock star of social justice writing. In addition, he is an activist and an academic. He has worked for both the World Bank and the WTO and has protested them around the world, I believe. In his latest book, The Value of Nothing, you wrote tremendous about that, and that was on the New York Times bestseller list in 2010. And Raj, I really enjoyed your role in A Place at the Table, something that's very important to all of us. I hope today we get a chance to talk a little bit about food insecurity, food waste, some of the things that at the State Board of Food and Ag we're really trying to address. And I look forward to your upcoming film, Generation Food. So please welcome Raj. Okay, so here we are. I wanted to begin the discussion by just asking you, what are you most excited about? What's top of your list, and what do you think is going on today that might have a positive impact on our food system? Karen.
Yes, so thank everyone for being here today. So what's really top on my list is I'm really getting excited about planning this year's Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners Conference. And I say that because I came here in 2008 at the Santa Cruz program, and everyone was talking about sustainable agriculture and agriculture as a whole. But when I looked out, I didn't see farmers that looked like me, and so I was inquisitive to find out what role that we played as African Americans in the food system, and found that across the country, the numbers were dwindling. And so if there's a conscious effort about really getting people involved in the food system, I felt, along with some of my colleagues here in the audience and some friends, that we asked the question, what's for dinner? And what is the role of African Americans in the food system and people of color in the food system? So we had our first conference in 2010, which was really successful. Majority of people there were young African American and people of color. We had then another conference in 2011. We took a sort of a respite 2012. And this year we're looking forward to just move it out and opening up to so many people, not only in New York City, but across the country and across the world, to have some sort of dialogue to make sure that when we talk about a sustainable food system, it's just, equitable, and inclusive.
Wonderful. So where and when will that be?
So it'll be November 9th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. So everyone take out your calendars and mark it down.
November 8th.
It'll be held in New York City.
Okay.
And look forward for more information.
So Ben, are you planning on going? You're going to bring some of your produce up to that?
My produce go to Chicago.
Okay. So you got to wait till the green light. Ben, what the same question. What excites you? What's going on in your world, locally, nationally, internationally?
Thank you all for inviting me here. I'm more excited about the emergence of the everyday consumer concerned about their food. Mm-hmm. You know, in Mississippi, when we looked at California, it's kind of a love-hate relationship there. Because in California, what's things is going is new in California, they get to Mississippi about 15 to 20 years later. And if you notice that even in Mississippi now, the young people, the schools, the work we're trying to do to bring about awareness of sustainable food that can be grown local, consumed local, and local control. As Olivia stated, and I've listened very well, sustainable agriculture. I'm proud to say that I'm a fourth-generation farmer, been farming the same land since 1889. So I think that's somewhat sustainable. But how do you go forward with that for the next 100 years? And you know, in Mississippi, we number 50 in everything, just about. But for some reason, some of them think they're proud of that. As an example, our state legislature was in session for only 3 months, and they could have did what they did in 30 days. They passed the anti-Bloomberg bill. simply means you can go into the store with a gallon cup and get all the soda you want. To me, that's not progressive. So those are some of the things that we face. But I'm more excited about being here and the movement and sustainable agriculture through my work as Viva Campesino over the entire world. Us as small farmers, family farmers, the struggle is the same no matter where you're in Africa, Europe, or Asia. We still have to look at it from a global standpoint, how we can support one another.
Great. Thank you, Ben. And Pat, in your world of cooperative extension and childhood obesity, what are you most excited about today?
Oh, I think I'm excited all the time. There's so much happening right now. So I thought I'd just tell you, just on Friday, something that really excited me. I was speaking at a large meeting of health professionals in a red state. I won't say which one. And this was the first time where when I sometimes have the group kind of vision, think about a vision of kids getting healthy fast food, ones that, a meal at a fast food restaurant that actually meets the dietary guidelines that will improve their health with a fruit and a vegetable and a whole grain. And this was the first time I was so excited that we got an automatic applause for that in a red state. So this is really progress. And the same thing I mentioned also, part of that vision is having a farm bill where some of the money from some of the current subsidies moves into fruits and vegetables, and another applause. So I think this is just incredible progress right now. So that was one of the things. And then when I got back and looked at my email, I found that the FDA was going to be moving forward very aggressively, trying to get more information on those caffeinated energy drinks. And just a month and a half before, we had written a letter with 18 scientists and physicians to talk about the high risk of those beverages. So again, I think we're just seeing progress every place we look. So that food movement is alive and well, and we just have to, keep up with it, I think, because things are changing, and this is really exciting.
Great. Thank you, Pat. Marcia,
Hi,
from your
thank
world
you.
and pesticides and prevention.
Yeah, well, thank you and welcome everybody. It's really great to be here. At Pesticide Action Network, I'm really excited about the work we continue to do, which is bringing together science, organizing, and communications as kind of the three parts of building public campaigns, public will campaigns to build power to achieve policy change and practice change to really meet the needs of our members. We're part of a national network, we're part of an international network that uses pesticides really as an entry point to campaigns that are much bigger about food sovereignty, about food democracy. One of the things I'm really excited about now this year is my work as now also director of our grassroots science program at PAN. And grassroots science at PAN is essentially about doing, using, and translating, interpreting science to achieve advocacy outcomes. And the grassroots part is because the science is being done and used in advocacy campaigns by community groups themselves. So concretely, some of this looks like monitoring pesticides in the air and the water, work we're doing with self-organized community groups in Hawaii, California, Minnesota, and Iowa now. These are sometimes farm workers, sometimes family farmers, sometimes rural communities. And it's really exciting to be a part of what we call democratizing science, like bringing tools to communities that use them, that transform them in order to achieve their own outcomes. So that's one of the exciting things. I just want to add in there also being a part, we work in coalition and alliance, and being part of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance is a really exciting thing for us. There are members of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance out here in the audience. This is a nationwide alliance of workers, family farmers, faith groups, consumers, environmental advocacy groups that have come together precisely to, as in the program, it talks about bridging some of the fragmentation and building power as a civil society network.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you for your hard work in that.
Yeah.
And Raj, how about you? What's on your list?
I mean, I'm excited about this, the documentary I'm working on called Generation Food. And the reason it's called Generation Food is because we're looking at groups who are thinking not about what to eat tomorrow or what to shop for in the coming week, but to think about how to feed people a generation from now. And when you start thinking with that kind of long-term time horizon, the barriers to the food system start to look a little bit more porous, and you start being able to break a few more rules. And so we're following people around the world who are breaking rules, and breaking rules around farming systems that need to obtain. So we're looking at people who are doing some really exciting agroecology. We're looking at people who are breaking rules about distribution, really tackling the sort of central problem when it comes to hunger in the world today around gender. The fact that 60% of the people going hungry today are women or girls. That's a systemic problem, and we're looking at people who are transcending that. We're looking at people who are messing with ideas of property, intellectual property, or actually property around land. In Detroit, for example, Malik Yakini, who is here from the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, is doing some fantastic work with land occupation in Detroit. And by looking at people who are breaking rules, I think we're able to see visions for a new food system that exists today that hopefully will obtain a generation from now. And to be able to see our future, the harbingers of our future today, is incredibly exciting.
So Raj, that's a perfect jumping in spot for this next question. And I'm going to ask it of you. What do you see as key points of intervention for changing the food system? And what are the biggest obstacles you have faced in intervening?
I'm a little scared of answering this question because the organizers, in their infinite wisdom, gave us this question 3-4 weeks ago, and I still haven't come up with a good answer. We tried this in rehearsal on Friday, and
they're supposed to be spontaneous.
And what I spontaneously said there was capitalism. Capitalism is the problem, and Renata heard cannibalism. Which, I mean, in a sense, it's easier to talk about, right? I mean, cannibalism, people have views on that. I have a graduate student who's working on the sous vide theory of cannibalism. Someone's doing roasting. And but when you say capitalism, obviously people kind of, the white male privilege thing that Olivier very astutely talked about earlier on, the shutters go down. And people don't know what you mean when you say capitalism. And I think one of the ideas that I was really glad that Olivier touched on was this idea of the locked-in quality of the existing food system. And capitalism operates to do that in a range of different ways. I mean, obviously, in structuring the food system the way that it does, with its concentration of power in the hands of a few corporations, that's a locked-in phenomenon. And if we're thinking about obstacles, I think that's one of them. But it's also a cultural phenomenon. The way in which we are marketed to, the way in which we are told that there is only one kind of science, and that is the science that this university must pursue. A science of industrial agriculture. I mean, and also a science by which, or a view by which progress only happens when individuals or institutions own knowledge, where a few farmers get to be, or a few scientists get to be the sort of vectors of innovation and change. And the majority of people in the world are disenfranchised from being able to produce their own technology. And so some of the opportunities I'm seeing are around new ways of understanding technology. So, for example, in India, there's now being mooted a comprehensive ban of marketing of food to children. That's a technology for saving children's lives. In the same way, in Peru, there is a way in which indigenous First Nations have started to own their own potato DNA, their biodiversity, separate from the nation state. And so driving a wedge between the nation and the state, that's a technology for increasing food sovereignty. And all of a sudden, I think that what the opportunities that we see are opportunities that in a very deep way, challenge capitalism's hold on our imaginations, on the way in which we are currently thinking of our food system as a locked-in phenomenon. And if we identify capitalism as part of the problem and tease out the way in which it does lock us in, I think we have a number of opportunities. And some people would say, well, we have things like climate change. Climate change is an opportunity. And I worry about that because there's this sort of idea of a crisis is a moment of opportunity to be able to fracture open the food system. The trouble is, I mean, we had the drought last year, and I don't know if people saw the Financial Times coverage of this. It was very, very good. There was the drought, and then farmers were asked in the United States, is the drought related to? Is this a climate change problem? And the majority of U.S. farmers said, no, this is not a climate change problem. The drought is a subsidies problem. And so follow that through with me, right? What we see here is that to some extent the culture in which we find ourselves has made it difficult for us to interpret and to be able to lever ourselves out of our existing sort of boundedness within the food system. And I think if we're interested in opportunities and strategies for moving away from the food system that we're in at the moment, naming and identifying the ways in which our thinking has already been contaminated by living in this food system, whether it's about thinking about farming systems or about gender or about property. And imagining a research agenda and a movement that is that transcends the way that capitalism has kind of constructed us. I think that is an opportunity that I think is, I mean, it's a broad thing to put on the table to start off with, but I think that's a good place perhaps as a point of departure, and probably as good as cannibalism.
Yeah. Okay. I see cannibalism as a shorter-term issue, and capitalism as a longer-term issue. So before I move on to Karen here, in the next 5 years, is that something that we can harness? Is that something that this institute can?
Well, I mean, I think what's also exciting about the movements against capital is that there are fantastic movements like La Via Campesina that are already showing us and already experimenting in a very decentralized way with the kinds of citizens' initiatives that Olivier was talking about. I think what we have is, I mean, and often when you say capitalism, people think you mean enterprise and innovation. That's not the same thing. Capitalism is the opposite of that. Capitalism, the concentration of that innovation and experimentation. And I think what we're seeing is a lot more organizing around different kinds of innovation, different kinds of resistance to the existing food system, led by movements. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to celebrate and harness.
Great, thank you. So Karen, how about this issue of intervention? I've got to confess, when I saw that word, it's not a word that I often use. And so it struck me. So what was your response to intervention for changing the food system?
Well, first of all, I would just want to sort of talk about some of the obstacles first and then go into some of the innovation, because first of all, as a person of color that lives in a low-income neighborhood, I'm glad that I'm here today because I think some of the obstacles that we have in the food movement is that the people who are directly affected, who are marginalized, whatever sort of term you want to use, are really not stakeholders in the movement. They don't have a say. For too long, we've been talked about, we're on statistics, but when it comes to the solutions of problems, we're not there. The emphasis seems to be always on the problems, low income, people of color, and I think that needs to stop. That's number one. Number two, we live in a society where the problems or the solutions always are top. So it doesn't really filter down to the people who are marginalized, who need it the most. And we need to be stakeholders in this movement. If we're really going to take this movement seriously, we need to be stakeholders. That's number one. Number two, there's an air of complacency amongst a lot of us. We seem to have such a disconnect from our food system that we don't care. We've allowed the government, we've allowed lobbyists to care for us. And so we have to get back to caring for our food system. We have to get back to being stakeholders in our food system. Another thing is that we need to incorporate our youth. There's an aging population in the food system. The average farmer is 57 years of age. We need to be innovative in terms of bringing the innovative quality that youth have in this food movement. And also we need to change the language, how we speak about food. A lot of the language is around the experts and academia, which is all well and good, but we need to meet people where they are. And so the language that we use in the food system, when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about organics, a lot of that does not filter down to my community. So we have to use language that people can understand. Also, when talking about people getting involved in the food bill or the farm bill, how does that measure up? How does that trickle down so the common person in my neighborhood who is on a fixed income, median income of $23,000, a family of four that has to feed their family, how does that relate to them being involved in the food system? So we have to find some mechanisms, a common ground where it means something to the common person in my neighborhood to get involved in the food system. Now, there have been opportunities that are out there. A lot of us are now reclaiming land. Believe it or not, that is a political, and I say land is political in municipalities. Whenever you try to get land in the cities, it's politics behind it. Well, I mean, we are citizens. We pay taxes, and so we have a voice in determining what we want in terms of our land in our community. So a lot of us are doing, quote, land grabbing and taking land back in city, and so now you're trying to look at urban agriculture as a product of that land grabbing. Number two, some of us are now forming farmers markets. There were many times when people didn't want to come into our neighborhoods. You heard all the negative, we're too poor, it's too dangerous. Well, you know what, our neighborhoods are being gentrified. And so there's an opportunity for us as people of color, as low-income neighborhoods, to take back our neighborhoods and to form farmers markets, to form CSAs. but to be active participants in the food movement. Number 3, we're looking at urban farmers as a way of connecting and getting back to the land. We're also connecting with both urban and rural farmers because no, we can't grow food for ourselves as urban farmers, but we can make a connection between urban and rural. So these are some of the innovative ideas that are coming up. Another point I want to bring about, and this may be controversial, but I don't care, is this term called food desert. Nowhere in my neighborhood have I ever heard that term food desert. To me, it's an outside term from an outsider that has put that label on us. What you really need to understand is not food desert, but let's break down the barrier. It's poverty and hunger.
Yeah.
So if you take away the food desert name, poverty and hunger, in a country that has the resources to feed so many people, why is it that we're hungry? So let's get down to the nitty-gritty and really talk about the true element of poverty and hunger in our neighborhoods.
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, Raj, you mentioned global climate change, and in our lifetimes, poverty, hunger, food insecurity, food waste. These are what I feel most optimistic about is we can solve this. These are solvable issues. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get in my lifetime on global climate change, but I think on the issues you raised were really excellent. One thought I also had was Olivier's survey about scenarios for sustainable living. Does that get back to language a little bit? I liked what you said about changing our language and how we select things and how we say things. That really resonated with me. Pat, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I certainly agree about the food desert because I've been trying to measure those food opportunities in communities, and it's not, desert isn't the right word for it. There's food that is, we now have the cheaper food for the poor that is not an equitable food supply for the poor, but there is food there at reduced prices that will make you unhealthy. So people study the supply side of this and the demand side, and I'm primarily on the demand side on how to get the healthy diet to those who are most at risk for hunger and for malnutrition. And we're working hard on food access and behaviors and education, but the real obstacles, it seems to me, is that economics. It's not that people don't want the food. In fact, it sometimes is question on what that demand is. Do kids really want more snack-type lunches and the kinds of lunches that we've been, thinking is kind of the most desirable lunch for kids in schools? So we've been out surveying kids in schools, and believe it or not, when you put chips and sodas in a list of all the things they want available in their school to eat, fruits and vegetables come up number 1. Poor kids, hungry kids, middle-class kids, upper kids. I think we underestimate often those that we're serving because, kids will grab sweets often, but when you really get down to it, they're getting plenty of these other foods and they're wanting fresh foods and good foods. But the economics is it's just such a hard nut to crack. There was a study showing that per 1,000 calories, if you would really eat according to the dietary guidelines with your fresh fruits and your vegetables, whole grains and lean meats and low-fat dairies and all, it's about $18, and this was done in Seattle a few years ago by Drunowski, about $18 per 1,000 calories to have this optimal diet of foods. And then when you look at the complete opposite end of that distribution at a lot of the foods that are sold in convenience stores, and a lot of foods that sustain kids, for different snacks and for meals too. Chips and sodas and those big gallon sodas that you mentioned. Those sodas, very, very cheap. About $1.80 per 1,000 calories. So is that reasonable that we expect people, we're trying to educate them? It's not an issue of education. It's an issue of, food access. How do we change this around? And maybe, we just need really creative ways to provide that opportunity. And then at the same time, with our children, who I think there is lots of opportunity to teach healthy eating and encourage healthy eating through the school gardens and all the wonderful programs we've developed. But the marketing they're getting, we all know it and we talk about it, but when you really think about it, I mean, it's more than, just for an average child who's watching television, it's more than 3 hours a week of just ads telling them what to eat. And when you compare that to the number of hours on average in the United States, the number of hours of nutrition education per child per year is 4. So over 3 hours per week of teaching them, because ads do teach. So our brightest business school graduates are hired by companies that are really in business to increase market share for their products. And these products are in direct competition with the kinds of products that we're trying to encourage for healthy long-term living, and the reduction of chronic disease. So in my mind, that if we're going to really deal with the food system and getting the food all the way from production to, people's, stomachs and to their ultimate positive health outcomes, we have to really tackle these very difficult ones. One that's tied to freedom of speech, that advertising, and the other one that's tied to the whole economic engine of our society. So I'm hoping the Institute will want to take these on.
I think you've established some good challenges there. Ben, what about you in this question of intervening?
I see the problem in the South, at least, is, well, the whole world of the concentration of the marketplace. Like Walmart now control around 25% of the fresh fruits and vegetables that are marketed in the South. And then on the other side, you see the concentration of the resources that you need to farm. Mm. In the case of the crops that I grow is vegetable crops. If I want to sell watermelons to Kroger's, they dictate to me what variety to plant. Right. The same for the squash, the same for the cucumber. And those seeds that they dictate to me to plant come from Senate Seeds, which is a part of Monsanto. So I'm kind of trapped as to the diversity that I can produce on my farm. So that's one of the problems. The next problem is that the knowledge that farmers such as myself and older, and I'm quite a few years older than that 57, the average age of farmers, is being lost. How to farm sustainable, how to farm without the use of chemicals or a lot of petrol products. That vast knowledge that is out there is not being passed on to the next generation. And I really think we should concentrate on that effort of how we develop the next generation of farmers, producers that can really produce crops without relying upon heavy inputs. And when I think about a sustainable farm, I'm looking at a type of farm that has some animals, has some trees. In my area, is a lot of pine trees, sustainable longleaf pine. And the concentration of that market is changed in the last 20 years. There used to be quite a few family-owned sawmills that I could sell that timber to. All of those are out of business. Mm-hmm. Now I have to market it to a huge company like International Paper or Georgia Pacific, and they won't let me market to them because I'm only selling 50,000 board feet, and then I have to have certain insurance to get on their property and rules and regulations. So the concentration of that is putting a heavy burden on the family-type farm. But I think if we can look at this from the future, how we can develop a whole new system of locally controlled food and energy production. A number of our farmers now installing solar irrigation system. Some have solar panels on the house. And one farmer I was talking to, his meter, instead of going this way, it's going back the other way by having solar power. So Mississippi Power come put in a whole new meter on because you can't sell it back to the power company in Mississippi. So we have to take back that control, local control. And it takes the consumer, it takes the farmer, it takes researchers and bright minds such as in this one to get that knowledge down to the level of myself and other farmers that can really use it But I think in the future, we go forward. I think it's a bright future if we continue to move forward.
I'm very touched by your comments about the next generation of farmers. Ben and I and Karen had dinner last night, and I asked Ben, who is the next generation for your farm? And he said that his daughter had gotten married to a cattleman and moved 100 miles away, but you're hoping that maybe a nephew will come back. Great nephew, okay. So one of the things that we collectively across the nation and globe really have to be doing is training this next generation. And they won't look like me, thank God. They're going to look like you. They're going to look, they're coming out of college. This next generation is excited and knowledgeable about their food, and they care deeply about it. But man, we need training. Secretary Vilsack said we need 100,000 new farmers, and guess what? We need them today. And think of the next 10 years, the amount of transfer of wealth and land in this country, this beloved country, it's going to be huge. Marcia, you get the last shot at this question.
My. Okay, thank you. Well, great comment so far, so I'll just add to that with going to 3 or 4 of the obstacles that we're facing, that all of us face in our daily work, and then identifying for us perhaps 3 points of intervention. Building on what Karen was saying, one of the huge obstacles in the US, but in many food systems around the world, are the historical and current inequities in the food system that cause harm across lines of race, so particularly racism in the food system. So harm across lines of race, class, and gender. Our food system is really built on the structural exploitation of workers at all levels, from farm workers on up through the food chain, through retail and into restaurants and so far. And I'm really glad that Joanne Lowe of Food Chain Workers Alliance is here. They're doing fantastic work on this. We have a moment here with immigration reform. Unless we do something about our incredibly exploitative immigration system, we won't be able to transform our food system. So that's one thing. Kind of 3 other high-level barriers that we face are corporate concentration, the unprecedented pace of corporate concentration that has occurred over the last decade or more, leading to unprecedented levels of corporate power and influence over our public agencies at the federal level, over our public institutions, our land-grant universities, over the media. So all of this really pervades and control over the food system, the structures themselves by which imports, like Olivier put up the slide, imports are created and passed on or pressed through the whole system into exports around the world. So corporate control and power is a huge obstacle. Closely related to that is the US trade agenda that really relies on structural overproduction in order to send food around the world, that undermines small-scale family farming systems, and that comes back again. Olivier put up that slide showing how that destabilizes communities, rural communities move to urban areas, and so on. And the use of development aid as a mechanism to funnel profits back to the US economy while extracting political concessions from recipient countries. So our trade agenda is another major obstacle. And then the last one I'll just flag, of course there are many, but the last one I'll flag, again, is the dominance of one development narrative that has been upheld over the past 50 years and has really spread across so many sectors. Again, it pervades our media, our public discourse around needing corporate industrial agriculture to feed the world. It pervades decisions in the State Department, again, comes back to our trade, comes back again to who's really benefiting from this one dominant narrative. The flip side, of course, is that alternative narratives, community-led narratives, narratives from all parts of the world are silenced and are simply not part of the ongoing debate. So our ability to draw on the richness of alternatives out there is incredibly minimized. So moving from those kind of major obstacles, I'll just put out 3 points of intervention, and of course there are more and we'll discuss them. And these kind of are loosely paralleled on the way that PAN works. I mentioned earlier building public will through strategic communications, organizing communities to get power, and also grounding that in science and in credible research. So on the communications, for us, strategic communications, it's about, we already, as Olivier said, we know what to do. But how do we get that out there? How do we change public discourse in order to really be able to move some of these agendas forward? It's about how we frame and present these stories. So in this area, industry has been incredibly effective. By industry, I mean certain parts of the private sector. In our case, the pesticide biotech industry, Cargill, the grain distributors, have been very effective in pushing this. We need corporate industrial ag to feed the world. And that's a story that we hear time and again, and we need to, many of us are working to rebuff that story. We need folks in the research community to stand up and join us and really be proactive and aggressive in challenging that narrative, that story. Certainly colleagues of yours in this institute and in other universities that are affiliated with some of these corporations are doing that. They're getting their story out. They're on the news. They're taking out ads. They're going to DC all the time. So don't be shy. The other side is doing that. We need a really proactive, aggressive pushback from research institutes to stand up, whether it's give testimony, organize hearings, write op-eds, and figure out, as we'll discuss later in the day, how to work with advocacy groups that are doing that as well. So that's the communication side. On the science side, making your research accountable to a public agenda, not a corporate agenda. And that's a huge, huge piece. A lot of what we have available has been so, hijacked, so to speak, taken away, co-opted by the corporate agenda. The systems of ever since Bayh-Dole, of patents, create a system in which public, taxpayers are subsidizing the university researchers who are doing the work of corporations. Those benefits then get extracted and taken off into the commercial realm. So what does that mean for a university? Well, on the side of really examining how we are using our research investment dollars, we should be doing and calling for complete, rigorous, transparent review of these systems, of the Office of Technology Supports that promote patents, of cooperative extension, of the Food Institute. Really, where are the dollars going and who is benefiting at the end of the day? A little bit of patent revenue, or what are the benefits, if any, on the communities in which we live? So work along that side. Of course, there always are a few brave warriors in the academic research communities that stand up and speak, and they are very quickly smashed down and silenced. And we all know who those are. We all know some, and this happens around the world. What is the Food Institute going to do to protect those brave researchers, of whom we need more? And how are we going to create the mechanisms? We have an idea of fast-track tenure for those who do not accept money from corporations. We think that would be a great. Everybody loves fast track in this country, right? So let's put criteria for research for the public good into the mix. And then just very quickly, the last piece I'll mention, the other intervention is around these community-led, public-driven collaborations to make policy change that really are, working with this institute about unlocking knowledge, resources, and research so that they can meet community-articulated goals. And there's a lot of ideas I have there, but we're probably out of
No, you did
time.
a great job.
Yeah.
I've been clocking you. Without mentioning the word, you really talked about alliances, and that's my next question. And I want us just to jump in and cross-pollinate the idea here, but how can we build new alliances amongst researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and what different forms might these alliances take? Because we recognize that without those, we are at best just an institute, or at best a farmer, or an urban farmer, or whatever. So what can we do to build these new alliances? And just
Can I, Marcia, just look at something that you were saying about rather than having a corporate-driven science, having a public-driven science? Because when you look at the Green Revolution, for example, a lot of people in public policy, well, the Green Revolution was public science. We did it for the people. And I think that's a really good place to start picking apart what it is to be public. And in whose name these questions of research are done. And it seems to me that if we start with that, there are some safeguards now within the academy. I mean, when I did my PhD, there was no such thing as an ethics committee. But those were soon sort of wheeled in. Largely, it seems to protect the university's ass, right? Because if there is going to be exploitation done, you want it done legally. So an ethics committee is there to make sure that the university isn't culpable in one way or another for being particularly mean to the brown-eyed people to whom various experiments are done. And it's possible for that to be done in a way with public funding that might pass as public science. But there are other ways. I mean, imagine if there was an ethics community not in the university, but in the community where the research were being done. That would be a way of flipping on its head this idea, first of the university being the harbinger, the sole force for deciding what public research was. But also it would set up this mechanism of accountability. And I think that's the word that we're going to be coming back to again and again today, is what does accountability look like? And, and in fact, we have in front of us a proposal for an ethics committee from the community that I think is worth looking at. I think this is an important challenge to the way in which we conduct research in a university as being the people who are exclusively the ones to be able to decide the terms on which that research happens. Here's a way in which building alliances can happen by ceding the power that the university has within its ethics community, for example, within its ethics committee, and decentralizing that as the first step in building trust. And I think that's the hard part in all of this, right? When you're building accountability, there isn't a recipe for accountability. You try and teach it in methods classes, and you can never do it because there isn't a template. There isn't one. There isn't a checklist of did you meet this person? Did you meet this person? Did you share did you have a beer with them? Do they like you? Do they have your phone number if things go wrong? I mean, there isn't a sort of check. What you can do is build trust, and one of the ways you build trust is by ceding the power that the university has concentrated in some of its strange and arcane bureaucracies for far too long.
Building trust. Is there nothing more foundational and more important? And we have not spent enough time doing that. What other ways can we create alliances and building trust?
Well, I like to sort of bring it back to the fact that people really need to be educated around the food system. I think that a lot of times it seems to be separate. You have the academics doing one thing, you have corporations doing one thing, you have these community-based organizations doing one thing, and then you have people doing one thing. I went to the public schools. I grew up in a public school system, and my math may be a little bit off, but why is it that there's 3 or 4 companies that really co-opt the food system and there's 1 billion people? Sometimes that math doesn't sort of regulate in my head. That's a problem. Number 2 is really getting people focused about the political system. It took for New York City to really think about the political system at hand and how we're going to change that and how we're going to make alliances. Well, number 1 is the power of voting. And as community gardens and urban farmers, we are out there teaching people the power of voting and civics 101, analyzing who has the power and making the people of power or the position of power accountable. And so in order for us to move this movement forward, we have to educate people around the political system and understand is that who has the power? Who are the political people? We are. For too long, I think a lot of people have put their trust in the political and politicians and the political system, not knowing that we are the political system. We are the people in power. And so we need to sort of reverse that conversation and that mindset to understand that we as a people have the power. We are the people who can change the food system, who can change systems at hand. And also, again, I have this big picture of sitting down in community. And what I mean by sitting down in community, I mean sitting down at the table, breaking bread with people who don't look like you, who may be different than you, have different language, to sit at the table and talk about a common ground. One thing food is, it is an equalizer. It doesn't know color, it doesn't know how much money you make, it doesn't know how much degrees you have. It's a common base that we can all sit down and have this conversation about food and the effects that it has on all of us. Food should be a right for all, not a privilege for some. And so the sectors which make our community, be it the academia people, be it corporations, be it the low person on the totem pole from the food worker to the person in a restaurant, all need to be at the table. If we're going to call this an agricultural system, we need to be at the table talking about systems in place that we can all work together. Common ground, common language. It should not look as a monocropping system, but a system of diversity.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Thank you. And Ben, I know you had a comment you wanted to make.
I wanted to talk about that race, class, and gender issue as it relates to the South, especially in Mississippi. And that's one of the major reasons why we still struggling in Mississippi and Alabama and all of those southern states. We hadn't been able to get over that racism. that race, we can't seem to come together and work together. I have the opportunity to represent my school, Alcorn State University, on the Association of Land Grant, Public and Private Land Grant Universities. They have a meeting 2 or 3 times a year. And the last time we met in Washington, D.C., it was a gentleman spoke that most of the research money that goes to the land grant system now come from the companies. With all the budget cuts of state support of funds to these schools to do research, we're relying upon the Cotton Council, the Soybean Growers Association, Monsanto and Cargill, all of those furnish the money to do the research. So if that's the case, then you know how they're going to do the research in their favor. So we got to get back to a system of real public support for research and technology that can be transferred to back to the farmers. You know, that whole thing of, I agree with the sister that food is a common denominator. We all have to have it. And I think if we can just look at it from the standpoint that we need to know where it comes from, who produced it, the quality of it, and then to get that over to the everyday consumer that really they're more concerned about price than the quality of where it comes from and everything. And I can understand that in today's economy. Family of 3 or 4, like my niece, my great niece, I'll get them so many generations on ahead of me now. I get them. She says she don't have the time to cook. She got 3 children, working 2 jobs. So she looked for something she can open the bag, put in the pot, and warm up. And I kind of feel for that, but also at the same time, I go by her house, I cut the greens up, put them in the pot, and have them on the stove when she come home. But it's a whole mindset that we need to look at and change.
As we address this issue of alliances, I also want to pose this last question because we have about 10 minutes or so, or less. What are some of the ways in which the burgeoning food movements within both academia and civil society can help one another become more cohesive? So how could, that's what we're talking about, is how to find alliances and cohesion and move us forward. I think we know something about where we want to get. How the heck are we going to get there? Raj? Anybody? Marcia, you have an idea?
No, please.
Ben's got the mic.
Well, I'm just thinking about the slow food movement, the real food movement. We participate with the real food movement. We're trying to get what we grow into the colleges, on the college campus and the university, and the slow food movement that's is reaching out to other than, I don't know how to say, foodies, the elite people.
Those people.
How can we merge those movements into a greater movement? Like my membership in the Viva Campesino, the peasant farmer, the fishermen, the agrarian, the herdsman, how can we all ramp up that movement and come together with 1 or 2 core ideas and goals that we can reach?
Okay. Marcia, it looks like you have a thought.
I want to come back again before we can talk about becoming more cohesive to the issue of trust, because that is so critical. And there, speaking for myself and many in the movement, we have many good friends amongst you, researchers that we highly respect, and yet there is a huge gap of trust from that advocates and activists feel towards the research community. There are some that stand up, but more cases than not, at the critical moment, the academics disappear. We've had that experience time and again in multi-stakeholder collaborations where we're working together, getting a fantastic report out, and then the executive summary comes out. And this happened recently with the California Department of Pesticide Regulations panel on fumigant alternatives. Great work being done by some UC researchers, great report, but the executive summary, when industry began pushing back hard, the academics were silent and the activists were left out on a limb. So that's just one example where, there's that kind of like, hello, we need you there. We need you consistently there and in a timely way. So this is, the way action happens and there are policy moments and there are advocacy moments, it's not always on a publishing timescale. Like, we need somebody there right now and consistently there, at the table, speaking out very forcefully. And then I think to build trust, we need to see the institutions or the institute really walking the talk. So we have an opportunity, this letter here. We had an opportunity last year around the Gill Tract. What is the university going to do around the Gill Tract? What is the Food Institute going to do around the Gill Tract? There's a really exciting possibility for creative, radical shifts in how the university uses those resources and its own research and knowledge. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I really hope that this will be a moment, a creative moment where we'll really come up with solutions that are being articulated, by community members. And that could be one way, putting it into practice that will then lead to other possibilities and other ideas for, where can we go. Once we have that trust, and once we see, the walking the talk, then we can talk about cohesion and things like that. I certainly hope that we will get to the other side of that. And then just on the bridging fragmentation, many of the groups like in the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance and many social movements of Via Campesina are working on issues of race, class, and gender. But we all have to really take the time to investigate, own, and take action on racism, classism, sex, all these systems of oppression in the food system. So when we see if researchers can start to do that too, and do that very vocally and publicly, looking at from the impacts of your own research to the research agenda of the Food Institute, which we'll be looking at later today and more tomorrow, to the university's place in the world, in the community and in the larger world. Then again, I think that will create the basis when we see that work being done at home for us to talk about cohesion and build alliances.
Okay, Pat, and this is good job.
Yeah.
I just want to say, panelists.
I don't want to.
Panelists, this is your time to stimulate our stakeholders, mentors, as they prep for their breakout sessions.
Good.
So say stuff that really is meaty.
Good. Okay.
Or
Okay.
or veggie, whatever you want to say.
Okay. Well, building on, I wanted to build on that because we didn't even know that existed. 13 years ago, we started the Center for Weight and Health. We knew it was going to be about hunger and obesity, nutrition issues, and health issues. And I was brought on as a cooperative extension specialist, and we put as our mission to provide leadership in obesity and nutrition. But we didn't know exactly how we were going to do that. So it all started with, doing a literature review that the CDC commissioned, and we determined what were the factors in obesity and hunger and, all of the health problems. So we did that first. And pretty soon we realized that the community partners that we tried to engage were really wanting that information, but they wanted in a form that was useful. So we went back and really looked at the questions they wanted to know, and then we had to reframe that to get it back to them in a way that would really be useful. And then soon we learned that they had specific questions that we had never even touched. And so we began to meet with them and find out what were the questions they wanted answered. And then we reframed our mission even differently. So we then called ourselves an organization on campus that would bring information out to the community in a form that could be utilized. So it has to be in a different form than our executive summary or whatever. And also that would bring the questions for research from the community into the university to attend to. And it has, so over the 13 years, we've now brought in well over $50 million in projects that are all community-based or government-based, but dealing with food programs, dealing with programs versus policies. But it's always learning from those advocates who know so well, if you don't get the question right, it's not going to be used by the community. So I think it's been a real learning experience to know that cooperative extension has kind of guided this, because we're experts or we should be experts in dissemination and the science, but really making it useful to the groups that we serve. So now we've worked with people and done studies framed in a way that we never would have framed them. Like, there was a group, the first food bank in the U.S. in the central New York to have a no soda, no candy policy. So that they were being criticized by other food banks that they weren't giving people freedom and all the foods that they would want. They're poor, but they should have access to all the foods. So they said, the question we need answered is this meeting what do they want? Are they happy with our policy? So they brought us in, and we had staff in New York anyway over there, and we just found out the answer to that question. And it's moved the whole field of food banking right now and nutrition and food policies, because the fact is they wanted healthier foods. They have access to the other foods. Yeah. But we would have been studying the wrong issue if we hadn't said, what is it you need an answer to now? And so I really applaud you. I think you're right on track that we have to really make ourselves relevant, and then the information is used. And it's used by policymakers, it's used by community groups. So it's been a real learning experience for us, but I think the university can really meet the needs if we learn from those who are out there. So thank you for bringing that up.
I just wanted to address that, and Marsha's point about cohesiveness as well. That there's, if we try to research everything about sustainable agriculture, we'll get nowhere, because there's no way to do a comprehensive research agenda that makes everyone happy. But the model that I like for doing sort of partial cohesion is via Campesinos' model of food sovereignty, where there's a list of basic things that everyone agrees on. If you are signed up to food sovereignty, then you believe in things like women's rights and the determination of the power of states, unions to be able to shape their own food policy, and an end to agriculture at the World Trade Organization. And there's a long, long list of things that that food sovereignty involves, that the commitment to food sovereignty involves. Now, you don't have to, what happens next is for communities to decide, well, what does that mean to us? And that process is going to be different for every community. And so not everyone's going to be on the same page, but at least everyone's going to be in the same book. And that's important, because otherwise to have a sort of comprehensive, because Monsanto is selling its stuff as sustainable. And I think it's important just to lay it here that that's not what this research institution is about. That vision of agriculture, of monoculture, of industrial agriculture, of capitalism in agriculture is not what this institution should be bothered with. We're interested in making that transition to something more sustainable in every way that Olivier outlined. But that means setting up the framework, certainly for just everyone agreeing on some basic and fairly advanced principles, but then also having in place a procedure so that we can move forward with what it looks like sort of lockstep. We're not going to goose step our way into the future of a bright, shining, and authoritarian sustainable food system, but rather something that actually allows space for different research projects in different communities to be able to articulate their needs with the freedom that those communities deserve. And again, to see that in action, I sort of defer to Via Campesina, because I think that they're doing it really well.
If I can just build on the reference to La Via Campesina, which is very powerful. If there can be, so we all recognize the institution within which we are sitting, and you are, and the limitations and the courage it takes to fight and the difficulty of doing so. But as Raj is talking about La Via Campesina, we can generate ideas about developing parallel global network of researchers, while you're fighting the fight at home and in your institution and in your doing the work that needs to be done at home, making connections with progressive researchers around the world. There are bodies of research and information that academics will have more access to. Like we can't afford access to market data to be able to look at where Monsanto's where it's going or all of this. It costs thousands of dollars to access this data. If you guys can, and if you're working in a network and can make this information available, that's part of unlocking the locks on knowledge and power and resources and research. Make that information available with the resources at hand, in the service of identified objectives of La Via Campesina or of global social movements. What are the research questions that those are asking? For us, within the movement and within a global movement, to be able to have the documentation of successes in South Africa or what's happening in India and Bangladesh, what's happening in Peru, that can be very valuable. And of course, we need the resources to be able to conduct and have our own community-to-community, farmer-to-farmer exchanges. But researchers could play a very helpful role in that. Question is, to what degree are researchers also willing to take direction in setting a research agenda from the communities on the ground?
Good. Any examples of research that's going on at this institution or institutions that you're familiar with that you think is what we should be looking at for this new institute? Is there, can we point, you've pointed to some outside the university. Is there stuff that's going on inside universities, nationally, internationally, that you'd say, this is a goal? This is something we want to...
Can I just answer in terms of what the community is doing basically? Because I look at this as the new civil rights movement, and I think the parallels in terms of the students. I mean, during the civil rights movement, students' activity was monumental, as well as the relationships that we had with religious organizations, the churches and synagogues, and as well as with farmers. So for me and for a lot of the people in urban areas, for us, it's our new civil rights movement to look at the food in such a way that it encompasses so many outside organizations working together to make sure that the food system is sustainable.
That's very nicely put. Appreciate that. Any other thoughts you want to leave before our breakout session? And we've got 5 minutes. Let's fill them up.
Yeah.
Well, this, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You've got an idea?
Sure. Go ahead. No, you go.
Well, I was just thinking about, I know several of the land-grant institutions in the South, Auburn University, and Mississippi State is just now beginning to look at sustainable agriculture as a part of their program. On my farm, as we speak now, I have about a 2-acre demonstration research been going on for about 3 years on no-till farming as it relates to improving soil and air, water quality. Mm-hmm. So several of those types of them, but it's just beginning to get into that type of research.
Now, Ben, is that in connection, is that your own research? Is that connection with
That's in connection with Auburn University, Mississippi State University, and Alcorn State University. It's a 7-year research project.
Excellent.
And I think the movement to do that type of research came from the bottom up.
Good.
Instead of from the top down. But it's always a case of how much money they have to do the research. But in the case of this new center being developed here, definitely look at the knowledge that's coming up as well as coming down.
Okay. Let's end on that one.
Yeah.
You got an example?
I was just going to add an example. It's not from a university in the United States, and it's not actually from a university, but IIED. So that says something, right? The International Institute for Environment and Development back, some years back, Michel Pimbert was organizing citizen-led juries, farmer juries out in parts of West Africa and in other regions in which they were having the farmers, the community members come forth and testify as to like what their research needs were, what they were working on, what their issues were, across disciplines, all of this. It was being done, and it's been done, and there's a fantastic, it's available online in multimedia format. And that's the kind of thing, I don't know that any universities in the US have begun to do that kind of thing, but create, with the resources you have to create the infrastructure to go to the communities, go to the urban communities, go to the rural communities, talk to family farmers and farm workers, and create, a really public platform for identification of what the research priorities are, what the real issues and advocacy priorities are for communities across the country. Perhaps some folks of you out there in the audience would be able to say, you know of somebody who is doing this in this country in a university. Maybe that will come up later today.
Well, I want to thank our panelists, and I really want to thank you for taking this important time. As everyone said before us, this is the beginning. It's going to take a lot of exchange and buy-in from all of us to shape this incredible journey. But thank you.
Yeah, and they were exceptionally brave, I think, to step into an unscripted experiment like that. So I want to echo the appreciation. Wonderful. So you can stay there maybe until we're ready to move. I don't think we mentioned that the arc of this symposium, today's the big day, it's the big kickoff day. Tomorrow there's a smaller subset of mostly faculty and as well as the presenters, many of whom have traveled a great distance to be here, who are going to stay put and dig a little deeper into some of the themes that have emerged from today. So I just wanted to let you know that your feedback from today is going to feed right directly into that tomorrow. There's talk about perhaps publishing something that comes out of this on the website at the very least. It's a little unclear at the moment, but that's one thought, is to to synthesize some of these emerging themes and trends and put them out for response. And then we're going to move into breakout now, and when you get into your breakout group, you'll learn a little bit about how the capturing or the harvesting of your ideas is going to take place. But there'll be a scribe in each group and a table leader or a facilitator in each group, and they're going to help you in the course of your breakout to collectively try to identify some of the sort of top level thoughts or ideas that kind of emerge as you talk together.